Everything you do out there in the streets, Red, it doesn't work. Did you know that?
Oh, and what you're doing is better?
What I do, I just do.
The Daredevil vs. Punisher moral debate covers concepts and philosophical conversations that go back ages. Their interactions within the second season of Daredevil lay out a fascinating groundwork to think about and analyze these ideas. They are both men that have seen the world in a grim, dark, and realistic point of view and do what they think is right to cope with it. They want to change the world for the better, but the way they go about enacting that transformation is certainly very different. A category for the outcome of Punisher's ethics would be to call them utilitarian, in the sense that he wants to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people by killing these criminals to ensure they can never hurt anyone else again. There's a personal thirst for revenge and a love of violence that entangles that, but the consequentialist outcome of killing them is the same. Daredevil has a Kantian level of commitment to deontological ethics. He doesn't want to kill in any circumstances, even though he knows that there's a high risk the criminal will reoffend when they get the chance. He has a hopeful view of humanity and believes in rehabilitation and redemption, which I think root from his belief in Catholicism.
People don't have to die.
Come on, Red, you believe that?
I believe it's not my call, and it ain't yours either.
Whether vigilantes should just kill criminals or deliver them to the law so the people know the system works is a discussion that has always been in the superhero genre. Vigilantes are taking the law into their own hands to various degrees, so even if they capture criminals and then hand them off to law enforcement, it isn't proving that the justice system works. It's a flaw in their methods that actually prove the exact opposite, because they are hypocritically not following the same laws that they want the rest of the public to respect and uphold. Vigilantes have to toe the line of not following the common rules and laws of society, all the while trying to enact justice, and just how far outside the law they should go to accomplish it. A rebuttal to that is that vigilantes are just a temporary and minority exception to the law, and a necessary evil for the good of society. The slippery slope argument seems applicable here, because now how do you stop dozens or hundreds of citizens from wanting to become vigilantes? And how do you even assure that all of their actions will be ethical and that they will be held accountable if they get out of control? Who watches the Watchmen? That's why a system in place for handling justice makes much more sense, but of course, you still have issues of corruption and negligence there as well. Each method has its drawbacks. Daredevil's ethics of not killing is pretty similar to the popular version of a Batman who does not kill. I won't linger on the Batman comparisons for too long because this essay isn't about him, but the characters do have a very similar framework, and I think it relates to how society views vigilantism as a whole. Some people say the no-kill rule is fundamental to the character, and some people like to see the rules bent a little bit more. It's a strange dichotomy of people loving Batman with his no-kill rule, but then critiquing him and saying the main flaw in his character is that he doesn't just kill the Joker. And yet, in Batman v Superman, when we get a seasoned vigilante with a layered reasoning on his fall from what he once set out to be, and the nihilistic outlook on crime being a relentless black hole, and what a realistic journey of vigilantism might look like, people respond in outrage and say it's an insult to the character and what he stands for.
A little hypocritical. What'd you say?
So this all begs the question, what does the public really want? And what is the popular consensus for punishment? If our protagonists can't have story arcs and moral struggles, then they are just one-dimensional and boring. But is that how we would really want people to behave? There's a line said by the Punisher in this episode that has direct correlation to the world of Batman. And I first have to address it before I see it in the comments. No, I don't mean the meme about Batman saying, if you kill a killer, the number of killers in the world remains the same. And then the reply from the Punisher saying, that's why you kill more than one. This is always taken out of context and ignores the point. The idea is about what murdering can do to your personal mentality and morals, obviously not the literal statistics. Instead, the line of dialogue I'm actually referring to is,
I think you're a man who can't finish the job. I think that you're a coward. You know the one thing that you just can't see? You know you're one bad day away from being me.
This one bad day line originates from the graphic novel The Killing Joke, written by Alan Moore, where the Joker brutalizes Barbara Gordon and then torments Jim Gordon to show him that it only takes one bad day to snap and abandon all your previous principles. Frank is trying to relate with Matt here and trying to get him to admit that he may have had the same types of thoughts that he has. I think the impulse of feeling and wanting to murder has crossed Daredevil's mind before. He has beaten some people to the point of them being hospitalized for weeks, with perhaps permanent brain damage and probably hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt with hospital bills.
He spent the next month in a hospital, eating through a straw. And I never slept better.
Daredevil does take enjoyment in stopping crime and saving people, but his moral code makes him feel honorable and virtuous about doing it because he has rules that keep him from becoming what he's trying to defeat. Sure, if Daredevil used guns, he could just assassinate or murder Wilson Fisk and end him. But then, who would rise into power in his place? Then, it's just a never-ending game of whack-a-mole where nothing ever changes and you just kill the next crime boss that inevitably comes into power. If he is able to reason with Fisk and communicate his intentions with him, he hopes a man of that stature can be used for good and help change the city more effectively. It's much harder to restrain yourself and stand by your morals than it is to instinctively lash out and let your emotions overpower you.
You're not that guy, right?
You want to explain that to the orphans and the widows of the men you killed?
Daredevil doesn't want to cause the pain and heartbreak of losing a loved one inflicted upon the families and the children of the criminals he's trying to stop. He knows the sorrow of losing a father from early in his own life, and he doesn't want that suffering to happen to anyone else. He doesn't want to become a killer. By not finishing the job when he apprehends criminals, you could say he is still responsible for the deaths that the villains will cause, because he could have killed them and prevented further crime. But that also negates moral responsibility from the killers themselves. Being a realist, you can still say that Daredevil would be responsible, but that logic is similar to saying that the parents of the killer should be responsible for merely conceiving them, or that Samuel Colt, who was crucial for inventing the modern pistol, is responsible for every criminal who uses his invention to harm others, regardless of what his intention was in the first place. At some point, responsibility has to be assigned to the perpetrator and can no longer be pushed back to a cause that preceded it. Why should Daredevil have to be held responsible for them then? In some circumstances, I think he can be held causally responsible on a technicality, but surely not morally responsible.
Yeah, what do you do? What do you do? You act like it's a playground. You beat up the bullies with your fists, you throw them in jail, everybody calls you a hero, right? And then a month, a week, a day later, they're back on the streets doing the same goddamn thing.
So you just put him in the morgue.
You goddamn right I do.
The permanence of stopping criminals for good is at the heart of Punisher's ideology. It's hard to argue why you should keep criminals alive and waste time and money giving them chance after chance when they have proven time and time again that they don't want to change. How likely someone will be to reoffend and the nature of their crime can tell you a lot about that person. This small clip from Sam Harris touches on this point nicely.
So if someone accidentally bumps into you, well, because it's an accident, you don't have any negative expectation of what they're going to do next. If someone intentionally harms you, now you know you have a problem in the next moment because it says something about the nature of their mind.
It may sound simple or obvious, but I think it's important to realize the distinction between purposeful harm and accidental. When a criminal is taking part in murdering or human trafficking, that clearly says a lot about their character and the type of immediate threat they are to people. So immediate action to rectify that and prevent further harm is a logical step to want to take. Whether that step should go so far as the irreversible elimination of their life, that can also be hard to justify, especially conceding that power to a vigilante who can pick and choose who they want to kill unilaterally, as opposed to a structured judicial system where the offender's misdeeds are analyzed and judged with lengthy thought given to all the repercussions. Ideally, this system would always be just and fair and would do a good job at rehabilitating people, but that's not the system we have now, unfortunately.
Really, you never think for 1 second.
Shit, I just killed a human being.
It's being pretty generous.
A human being who did a lot of stupid shit, maybe even evil, but had one small piece of goodness in him. Maybe just a scrap, Frank, but something. And then you come along and that one tiny flicker of light gets snuffed out forever.
Frank dehumanizes the people he kills. People often dehumanize their opponents or enemies so that any extremes they use to inflict pain or harm can be easily justified because they are so much better than those animals.
He's not a person anymore. No, he stopped being a person when he took our daughters.
I think people dehumanize others because it can be disturbing to confront depravity face to face. I hear people often say they don't mind and they think that rapists should be raped in prison. To me, that shows they aren't against the act itself then, just who it happens to. And what about the person that would be doing it? Are they now morally justified in doing the vile and despicable thing you supposedly hate just because it's to someone who you think deserves it instead of an innocent? They are just creating another scenario where someone is doing an evil and degrading act to someone. So I don't think that perpetuating that further is an ethical stance to have. Classifying horrific humans as animals or subhuman may be needed to cope with the brutality of their deeds, but I don't think it's constructive with preventing or treating that behavior. I also don't think it's accurate because you don't truly know what lies beneath the surface of those around you.
Are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands. And we grew up in regular families.
It's frightening to realize that humans can be capable of such wickedness. Frank thinks of the people he murders as useless scum and he hates them.
I think there's no good in the filth that I put down, that's what I think.
And how do you know?
I just know. Look around, Red. This city, it stinks. It's a sewer.
While that opinion may make some sense to have, remember, this is the same man who has no moral problem killing this innocent old man. He has justifications for killing all the criminals, but his justifications for killing a fellow veteran would just be a selfish cop-out of doing it to protect himself, and hiding behind his,
What I do, I just do.
He wants to nihilistically just do whatever he wants, but he also wants to feel cathartic relief and revenge for the killing of his family, so of course he believes what he's doing is right. So when he does something wrong, it's just a shit happens mentality, but when he kills a criminal, he wants to believe he's delivering a just punishment.
Only I do the one thing that you can't. You hit them and they get back up. I hit them and they stay down. It's permanent. I make sure that they don't make it out on the street again. I take pride in that.
Harsh punishments for crime can also be a deterrent to future ones. If you live in Hell's Kitchen and you see the Punisher slaughtering your criminal colleagues, you might think twice about the line of work and lifestyle you are in. In Tamler Sommers' book, A Very Bad Wizard, he talks to Philip Zimbardo, the man responsible for the Stanford prison experiment. On page 49, Tamler brings up something called the expressivist theory of punishment, which says that, quote, the goal of punishment is not to give people what they deserve, and not just to deter future crime, but to publicly express your condemnation of an act. And if you don't punish the culprits, you're sending an implicit message that the act is morally acceptable. Philip Zimbardo replies by saying, quote, yeah, most punishment does not deter, except for a short time. There are so many factors that go into producing any type of crime that a deterrent effect can't have much of an influence. In fact, most people don't even know that someone was arrested in New Hampshire or Arizona or Alaska for something and is on death row. So how can it be a deterrent for me here in San Francisco? End quote. I think he's partly right, and I think it shows that for a deterrence to work, it has to be everywhere in the society so the local public can have a firm grasp on what's being punished. So if you think about it with public condemnation being the goal and not pure punishment, the actions of a lawful death penalty versus Frank's murdering can still be similar in practice, but intentions and methods matter. And the Punisher is mainly channeling his rage and anger into something he believes to be morally right, not selflessly trying to make the lives of everyone in the world better. Trying to categorize the Punisher's moral ethics again, it seems they are more geared towards retributive justice, which is a system of criminal justice based on the punishment of offenders rather than rehabilitation. Throughout the argument, he's shown no honest thought to rehabilitation being present in any of the people that he murders.
The people you murder deserve another chance.
What, to kill again, rape again? Is that what
No,
you
Frank,
want?
to try again, Frank. To try. And if you don't get that, there's something broken in you you can't fix. And you really are a nut job. There is goodness in people, even in you. And you're gonna have to kill me because I'm never gonna stop coming for you.
Despite the passion Matt exudes, he is a bit hypocritical here. He talks about the hope of letting people try again, but then says there's something broken in Frank that he can't fix if he doesn't see his point. The scene is written and acted in a way where the characters can say things off the cuff that even they might disagree with if they were given enough time to analyze the conversation and think about their overall argument more. Matt's worn out and has had the shit kicked out of him, and he feels like he's losing the argument, so resorting to those type of tactics is understandable, even if it's not helping his case. How realistic is Matt's hope in rehabilitation? I touched on topics earlier of retributive justice and rehabilitation, but you have to wonder, how well does the prison system really work? As of 2022, the US has some of the highest recidivism rates in the world, with around 44% of criminals returning to prison within the first year released. The US is notoriously known for having around 25% of the world's prisoners, with a population that is only about 4.15% of the globe. Maybe America is just that efficient at apprehending criminals? Or is there a more nuanced reason for the high incarceration rates? Horrible prison conditions, overcrowding, and difficulty readjusting to normal society are often cited as reasons that the recidivism rate back into the system is so high. So Daredevil is fighting an uphill battle, but the juxtaposition of him being a lawyer as well as a vigilante is such a cool aspect of his character. As a lawyer, he might be able to do better and change the system from within, but the hard truth of reality can be a hard pill to swallow. By the end of their argument, Frank opts out by just punching Daredevil in the face. Even though they both critiqued each other throughout the argument, Matt was giving up on the arguing and resorting to more personal insults at the end, rather than trying to persuade Frank. Even though Matt says Frank is going to have to kill him because he'll never stop pursuing him, Frank still doesn't kill him, when he very easily could. I wonder if Frank recognizes Matt's perspective and wants to let him live so he can accomplish what he can't. Or maybe he just thinks that even though he's doing a half-assed job, it's still better than nothing.
I didn't know. The old lady was in the house.
What old lady? What did you do?
I didn't know she was in the house. She wasn't supposed to be in the house.
Frank then ends the debate by bringing a criminal to the rooftop and forcing Daredevil to make a choice. Shoot the man himself, or else he would do it anyways. He negates personal responsibility and tells Daredevil that both outcomes will be on him. I don't think Matt should be held morally responsible for both outcomes, because 1, he isn't free himself. He is forced into this position by being held hostage by Frank. 2, it isn't his fault that Frank is choosing to present this situation, so the fact that the criminal will die regardless of what Matt does actually shows that the situation is out of his control, so he shouldn't be held morally responsible. Matt is able to find a third option and frees himself, but the criminal still ultimately dies. Overall, this is one of the best dialogues of philosophical reasonings I've ever seen in a film or TV show. Both characters have such passion for what they believe and why they do what they do. Figuring out who is right is a hard task, and the best position may lie somewhere in the middle of the two extremes. Whichever side you feel initially drawn towards, I think it's very important to constantly examine your ethical beliefs and be open to hearing new ideas. Being forced to defend positions you have is essential to strengthening those opinions, and in examination, you could find some new concepts you weren't familiar with. The Punisher versus Daredevil dynamic provides intriguing thought problems, and this episode is a masterclass in depicting ethical disagreements on screen.